Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Film Brits podcast. I'm your host Trilby, the Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney of film criticism, and today I'm here to present to you, it's kind of like a post-summer wrap-up basically. What we've got is that even though we've still got another few weeks left of the summer movie season, traditionally it's around May until the end of August. There's nothing really coming out of the next couple of weeks that I'm particularly excited for or have major expectations for. So as a result, I'm going to be doing my top 5 most disappointing films of summer 2017, because all the films that I had prior expectations for, or like notable prior expectations for, where I really would genuinely be let down if they weren't any good, all of those films have basically passed. I still have yet to see films like Atomic Blonde or Captain Underpants. However, those aren't ones that I have a particular investment in. Even if they were the worst films of the summer, I don't think they'd be making a top 5 list like these films would. So before we get to that, I'm going to be starting the segment with the Share the Love segment, which is basically... there's a lot of negativity in the world right now. If you look on Twitter or on Facebook or on the news or on your social media of choice, whatever, there's a lot of negativity going around, particularly in Charlestown in America right now, where basically white supremacists and Nazis are kind of running rampant right now. And it's absolutely depressing, and it's just not a fun time right now. We're going to be using this opportunity to just share some positivity, and I do that by plugging a online personality or a program or something that I just really would like people to just spread some positivity towards, and that this week is the Galactic Yo-Yo podcast. For disclosure, I did record an episode with the Galactic Yo-Yo podcast about 2 weeks ago. It's a Doctor Who sci-fi themed podcast where every week the host, Dylan, who we actually met last year at the Manchester Philharmonic, when I did a call out saying, hey, I'm going to be making a short film at this event, come over and let's make films together, or you can make your own, let's have an awesome fun filmmaking time. He was actually one of the people who got my call and actually came out, and he made a film. He actually mainly, if I recall correctly, he mainly showed up that week just to act and just to be in other people's films, but he actually wound up making one of his own, which was actually really entertaining, really enjoy it. I can't quite find a link to it. If I am able to find a link to it, if he sends me one, or whichever comes first, I'll put that in the description below, or plug it on Facebook or Twitter. But either way, if you just go on Galactic Yo-Yo, which is a Doctor Who reference, you'll understand the reference in the first 30 seconds of the podcast. You'll be able to check out his SoundCloud or subscribe to him on iTunes. It's basically a Doctor Who themed podcast where every week he brings on a new guest and talks about something positive or negative about the programme. He's brought on guests such as myself. He's also brought on Luke Spillane, Richard B. Brooks, and a few others. I highly recommend giving it a listen, particularly my episode where I talk about the Rings of Akaten and also Peter Capaldi's tenure as the 12th Doctor. We recorded for about 80 minutes. It was a really fun podcast to do. I massively appreciate being on the Galactic Yo-Yo podcast. Be sure to give that a listen. Now, without further ado, let's talk about the top 5 most disappointing films of summer 2017. Now, let me just clarify. There are only 2 films on this list that I actually would consider to be bad or below average films. The rest of the films, there's a difference between a disappointing film and a bad film. I think that a film could still be pretty good and still and it could still fall below expectations, as I'll explain with a couple of the entries. There are 2 films here where if for some reason I was forced to do a binary Gene Siskel, Roger Ebert, thumbs up, thumbs down approach, that 2 films here would be thumbs down and the rest would be thumbs up. So I'll clarify which films they are when I get to them. So if I wind up giving one of your favourite films of the year or one of your favourite films of the summer, if one of those films winds up being on this list, then please don't flip the hell out about it. I will hopefully justify my disappointment in these films. There's been a lot of really good films this summer. If you count further back to maybe March time, then you do have films like Logan. You also, which just completely blew my expectations away, you have films like Get Out and Baby Driver and a few others. This has been a pretty solid summer, and there's also been a few films which I thought were pretty good. I just didn't really have prior expectations for them, such as Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets, which is pretty good. Cars 3 was pretty good as well. There are some good films out there this summer. I just think that there was quite a few disappointing films this summer, and whether or not audiences went out to go see them, you'll be the judge of that, or like the numbers will be the judge of that. that, but this is just my personal subjective opinion. So my number 5 most disappointing movie of the summer 2017 is actually a joint 5th place, because I didn't dislike them, but I was disappointed for pretty similar reasons, and also they are in the exact same franchise. The 5th most disappointing films of 2017's summer season for me was Spider-Man Homecoming and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Both are films which I would give a 7 out of 10 to. I liked both films. I just think both films fell short of their potential, and in the end have left practically zero lasting impact on me. I have very high expectations for MCU films, and I think that when you have Spider-Man, which is this iconic Marvel Comics character, one of the most beloved characters in the whole superhero pantheon, returning to the MCU, and you also have Guardians of the Galaxy returning. Guardians of the Galaxy, the first one, is one of the best films of the MCU. It's probably the best first standalone film, as in it's better than the first Hulk, the first Thor, the first Iron Man, the first Captain America. It is better. It is the best, for lack of a better term, origin story, or origin film at least. And then they have a sequel which ratchets up the budget, ratchets up the scope, and I think that it was actually a bit of a step backwards. I think that both films... let's talk about Spider-Man Homecoming first. A film I did like, but I think it lags behind Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 1, and is possibly on par, maybe slightly better than Spider-Man 3. And when we talk about the amazing Spider-Man films, this film, yeah, it's definitely far and away much better than those two, but I think that almost everything is better than those first two amazing Spider-Man films, so that's not really a point in its favour by default. Spider-Man Homecoming is a film which is basically a 2-hour film about Spider-Man saying, "Can I please join the MCU?" And in regards to that, it succeeds. It tells a pretty fun story. Tom Holland is terrific as the lead. I think Michael Keaton is actually one of the best MCU villains. And the same goes for Kurt Russell for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. I think these two films, despite being maybe in the lower half of the MCU, they definitely contain some of the best MCU villains. And I think that might actually be one of the issues why they sort of fall flat for me, because they don't focus enough on the heroes, because they spend so much time developing the villains, and Marvel are kind of struggling to quite hit that balance. They've always had a bit of a villain problem, but with Homecoming and Guardians Volume 2, that is not a problem. I think that the villains in both those two films are definitely in the top 3 of the MCU villains. I think Loki is definitely at the top there, but then we also have Vulture and Ego the Living Planet. I think that those villains are terrific. So like I said, I don't dislike these films. I think they are good films. I give them both around a 7 out of 10. I think with Spider-Man Homecoming, though, it is kind of lacking in emotional weight. I think that losing Uncle Ben, as in not even alluding to him in any way, shape or form, was a big mistake, because you are losing a key fundamental aspect of Peter Parker. We don't quite know what makes Peter Parker tick. I think the special effects sequences are still lagging behind Spider-Man 2, even though that film came out 13 years ago. I think there's hardly any effective Spider-Man moments outside of comedic set pieces. I think the scene where he's locked in that warehouse, I think is really fun, but it's a fun time at the movies. I just wish Spider-Man Homecoming kind of wanted to be a bit more than that. I don't think it aimed particularly high. I think it was made, like, the Marvel Studios were caught between a rock and a hard place here, and they thought, okay, we've got Marvel and MCU film on his own, and we're not going to do anything with him. I don't think Peter Parker changes one iota over the course of Spider-Man Homecoming. I think, like, spoiler warning, when he saves the Vulture at the end, I think the exact same Peter Parker at the beginning of Spider-Man Homecoming would have done the exact same thing that he does at the end of Spider-Man Homecoming. He doesn't really change as a character. And with someone like Captain America in the first Avenger, when he is the same character from the beginning to the end, that works because he's given the super soldier serum, so he has an outlet for that heroic persona. That is where the change comes from, his physicality. That is not the case with Spider-Man Homecoming, because it's about him learning to not need the suit, but the suit doesn't give him the powers to save someone. The suit doesn't give him the powers to lift up that building that falls on top of him. The only obstacles that Peter Parker has to overcome are physical ones. There's no actual emotional challenge for him to overcome in Spider-Man Homecoming, and as a result there's very little emotional weight, and I expect so much more from the Spider-Man movie, in my opinion. I had rather high expectations, and the film did not quite meet them. And as for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, once again, I feel like a lot of the characters at the beginning of the movie are exactly the same at the end of the movie, with the exception of some of the offshoot side characters like Yondu and Nebula. I feel like those are the characters that go through the biggest changes, but when it comes to characters like Rocket, he goes through the exact same arc he did in the first film, not even kidding. And with Star-Lord, even though he's basically the lead Guardian and the relationship with his dad is meant to be the driving force of the film, he feels like a side character in his own film. Star-Lord is basically a nothing presence in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, and that really disappointed me. Like I said, I loved Kurt Russell. I thought he was terrific, and the spectacle of it is terrific. But I also think that James Gunn had much more tonal control in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1. I think in Volume 2, this film is tonally all over the place, and the stakes don't always feel real. I think what a great film is able to... Yeah, it's able to make you laugh sometimes, but it's able to know when to get serious. One of my favourite moments in any film ever is at the end of Shaun of the Dead, which has been a great, laugh-a-minute comedy. Laugh-a-scene comedy for about 90 minutes beforehand, then all of a sudden Sean's mum turns into a zombie. And then things get really dark, things get really dramatic, and then it culminates in Simon Pegg's character Sean breaking the glass and shouting, "Don't point that gun at my mum." It's just a wonderful whiplash moment, and it just makes you feel so strongly for these characters. This film's equivalent of that moment. I'm not saying that Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 has to be like Shaun of the Dead, I'm just using this example just for comparison. But when, in the big dramatic moment when Star-Lord realises what Ego's done to his family and that he has to get serious and grow up, for lack of a better term, he turns into Pac-Man. I think, yeah, funny visual gag, but it undercuts the drama of that scene so much to just have him randomly turn into Pac-Man. I think James Gunn, once again, he had much more tonal self-control in the first film, and I think in Volume 2 he kind of let his own... He let his own inhibitions get the better of him in a way. I'm not saying Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is a bad film. Like I said, it's fun, it's great. I think that there are some really fun sequences in it, such as just the massacre sequence with Yondu, Baby Groot and Rocket. This is a Disney film and there's literally a massacre in it. I just think that it's a film that really needed to get serious at certain moments if it really wanted to impact. And the problem with both films is that even some of the lesser MCU films, they kind of stick with me for a couple of days because there's some really interesting aspects to chew on. Even say Iron Man 2, I think Iron Man 2 is easily the weakest MCU film, and Guardians Volume 2 and Spider-Man Homecoming is better than Iron Man 2, both of those films are. But when it comes to the relationship between the two villains and some of the aspects revolving around them in Iron Man 2, they gave me stuff to chew on after viewing it. Spider-Man Homecoming, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 gave me nothing to chew on. I had nothing... I had no inclination to go see those films again. I think if I was going to be doing a marathon of the MCU films, I might even skip Spider-Man Homecoming and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, because there's just so little to them, in my opinion. And like I said, not bad films. These are these are only the 5th most disappointing films of the summer, so they're at the very bottom of this list. But I've got to be honest, I think that they did not leave the lasting impact that I hoped they would, and that their prior adaptations have. I think Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 and Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 1 and 2 are much better films and are still leaving a lasting impact, whereas these films, even though I only saw them a couple of months ago and a couple of weeks ago, these have just left zero impact with me. So the 4th most disappointing film is another film that I would lean on the good side. I would give it a thumbs up. It is War for the Planet of the Apes. I liked the film, but if you wanted to see War for the Planet of the Apes be its own thing in this trilogy, I think you'll end up disappointed. I think that this is not so much War for the Planet of the Apes as it is Dawn of the Planet of the Apes Part 2. I think that Matt Reeves is a very good director. I think he's a very smart director and great visual storyteller, but I think one reason Rise and Dawn feel like such distinct different installments, despite them being in the same franchise and being set in the same universe, is that they had different directors. And I think Matt Reeves basically just does Dawn of the Planet of the Apes again. I think that I was expecting something a bit more different, whereas I just got more of Dawn. And I think Rise of the Planet of the Apes is still the best in this trilogy. I think its use of human characters in relation to Caesar is what makes that film work so well, and I think that is the aspect that kind of let Dawn of the Planet of the Apes down slightly, and I think War for the Planet of the Apes is even lesser than Dawn, in my opinion. I think that the villain Woody Harrelson is kind of lacking. I don't think that there's many effective confrontations between the two villains. I think basically the lack of any sort of notable female presence does hold these films back to an extent. I think that if you've watched Your Movie Sucks, I don't always agree with him, but I do think that his review of War for the Planet of the Apes was right on the money, where this film has some great moments and some great scenes and segments, but the connective tissue and the glue that holds them all together feels rather haphazard. I think the trailers for this film were amazing and intense and brilliant and filled with great imagery, but it feels like the film that surrounds those bits in the trailers could have been much better plotted and much better thought out. I think the film, in terms of, I'm not going to spoil it, but I think the way that they concluded this trilogy in regards to Caesar's story kind of felt like it was a little bit of a cop-out and it was the easy way out. Like I said, I don't think that the Colonel Wooly... I think that the human villains weren't particularly interesting or notable in any way. And I think that it's kind of maybe lacking emotionally. I think that particularly in the relationship between Nova, who is this mute orphan child who joins with the apes, I think that her character is kind of feels like something more to put on the poster for iconography as opposed to an organic presence in the film. Like the first scene they find her... minor spoiler warnings, because these films are still relatively recent, skip forward maybe 30-40 seconds, but they find her, they kill her dad, and she has zero emotional reaction to that. But then when they kill a gorilla who she's only known for about 2 minutes beforehand, she's sobbing and crying uncontrollably. It's like, where is the emotional consistency with this character? And then there's the scene when Nova sneaks into the humans' base to feed Caesar. How the hell was she not seen? What the hell, man? How was she not seen? Like I said, I think that the connective tissue is just not there. And I think I actually kind of got pretty bored in the second act. I kind of found myself like my eyes getting rather heavy in the second act. Like I said, I think it's a good film. I think that just give Andy Serkis the bloody Oscar already, even if it's just a special achievement one or like a side Oscar. Just give him something, for crying out loud, as well as the folks over at Weta who have done superb work here. But it's mainly just the fact that I saw Dawn of the Planet of the Apes already, and this is basically just more of that. I wanted War for the Planet of the Apes to be its own thing, but tonally, aesthetically, it just felt like more of the same, and I just wanted a bit more from it, and I just wanted something maybe a bit more original, in my opinion. But that's maybe just me. I'm clearly in the minority, as loads of people have been raving about this film. I still like it. Like I said, I'd probably give it a 7. It would be a thumbs up. But it is the weakest film of this trilogy, in my opinion, and it is just Dawn of the Planet of the Apes Part 2. So my third is another war movie that I would give a thumbs up to, but a slightly less thumbs up to. This is Dunkirk. Now, I am so glad I saw this in IMAX 70mm. I saw it on the biggest screen possible, the way Christopher Nolan would want me to see it, I imagine. I think that in terms of it being a technical achievement, Chris Nolan and his creative and his technical team have done a terrific job. I think the cinematography by Hoyt van Hoytema is terrific. Hans Zimmer's score is incredible. The entire soundscape of the movie is just awe-inspiring. I think the film is just technically astounding, and I just love the look of the film and the soundscape of it, and I'm so glad I did manage to see it in that format. However, I think if I saw it either on DVD or Blu-ray or downloaded it or streamed it or watched it on a smaller screen than I did, this film would not have stuck with me past the weekend that I saw it. I think that emotionally, yes, the film is very distanced, it's very cold, and I know that that's the intention. I know that Christopher Nolan is a very anti-emotional filmmaker in a way. For example, like Christopher Nolan's most Christopher Nolan-y film, in my opinion, is Inception, which is a film that is literally about do not let your emotions get in the way of these fantastical worlds that you're creating. I think that the writing's kind of on the wall here in terms of what Christopher Nolan would want in his material, and I get that. And I think that maybe taking a cold, methodical approach to Dunkirk is an interesting approach. However, the main issue I have with Dunkirk is believe it or not, the cast, and not in principle. I think the cast he's assembled is very good. Kenneth Branagh, Cillian Murphy, Mark Rylance, Tom Hardy, terrific actors, and Harry Styles, he's even pretty good. Harry Styles is actually pretty good in this film. He's alright. However, they don't really act here. They're very stoic. They're very unemotional. They're very by the book. There's not, in what should be a very terrifying scenario, a very scary scenario, it feels like the only one actually trying here is Cillian Murphy, and that's because he's got the excuse of being shell-shocked. Whereas the rest of the cast are very stoic, very bland, very, maybe bland's the wrong word, but they're kind of expressionless. They don't seem to acknowledge the fact that they're in a war. They don't seem to be very scared. And I think that when you're on a beach with the enemy closing in, they're literally dropping posters and flyers and leaflets saying, "We surround you, we're coming to get you." And these guys aren't even the least bit terrified. That really took me out of the film. Like, Tom Hardy kind of has an excuse. He's in the air, he's trained, he's a badass and whatever. But the rest of the cast, the rest of the actors, the extras, it really took me out of the film. I didn't feel emotionally gripped. And no, I did not need these characters' backstories. I did not need Mark Rylance to say, "Oh, we gotta get back home because I gotta look after the wife who I met 30 years ago. We met on this rock and we got married the day after." I don't need any of that. And of course, if it did do that, it would disrupt the pace of the film, but we'll talk about the pace in a minute. I don't need the backstory, I don't need the reason for their survival, because in a way I think survival is enough. I just need the actors to have an emotion. And like I said, Cillian Murphy, because he's shell-shocked, seems to be the only one who has an emotion, but then when we cut back to earlier on in the film, before he gets shell-shocked, he just seems as bland as the rest of them. I think Christopher Nolan just said, "We'll get these great actors, and yeah, whatever, do what you gotta do. Oh, you want to do an emotion? No, don't do that." That kind of feels like the approach that he took. I think he was so wrapped up in the technical aspects of the film that he kind of forgot to direct his actors. Or if the only direction maybe he did give them was, "No, less of that acting, please." I don't know. It just really took me out of the film, and it just did not grip or involve me. Like, when you've got something like Saving Private Ryan, when you've got these men terrified on the beach, afraid to advance, and too scared to move forward, and screaming for their mothers, that hits home. That's terrifying. And I think that if you had maybe the Steven Spielberg creative team and the Dunkirk technical team, you could have something really, really special here. But another aspect that I don't really think entirely worked in Dunkirk was the three-pronged narrative. And those of you who've seen the film, there's the mole, the sea, and the air. Basically, the film takes place over 3 time periods and 3 different spans, but the editing makes them seem like a cohesive, singular entity. You've got the week before the boats land with the soldiers on the beach. You've got the day before they land by the sea, where you've got Mark Rylance's character taking the boat, and you've also got an hour before they land in the air with Tom Hardy as a member of the RAF in a Spitfire. And I think that those 3 elements taking place at different times, I don't think the film needed it. I think that it just made the film a bit convoluted. I think that I appreciate Christopher Nolan having faith in the audience to say, "Okay, this is what we're doing, you'll get it, just follow it." And yeah, I did follow it, I just didn't really see the purpose of it. Now, I understand that it's one of Christopher Nolan's things to sort of take time by the face and just slap it around and just say, "Time, you're going to be my bitch, and I'm going to do whatever I want with you over the course of my film." I just don't see how Dunkirk itself benefited from it. It didn't grip me more emotionally. It didn't grip me more in terms of the actual stakes. It just didn't. I think it worked. I think it was edited in a way that it did feel cohesive. I just don't see the purpose of it other than showing off and giving the editor, Lee Smith, a really, really hard time in the editing room. Like I said, I liked it technically. I think technically it was really good. The performances, when they were allowed to act, was really good, and like the whole technical experience of seeing it in 70mm IMAX was something that I'm really glad I did see. It just, like Guardians and Spider-Man Homecoming, it just did not stick with me like a couple of days after I saw it. I do not think this is even close to one of the best war movies ever made in terms of actually the whole total package film. Technically, it's astounding and great. I just think that maybe someone else should have written it, and maybe Christopher Nolan should have got a co-director who, when Christopher Nolan was really busy coordinating the boats and the planes and everything, someone could have said, okay, I'm going to spend time with my actors and actually, we've got a terrific cast here, let's have them do something. Okay, so the next two films are actually films that I would rate negatively. These are the Siskel Ebert thumbs down films. These are my most disappointing films of summer 2017. Film number two, I'm losing track here because I've already talked about 4 films, but okay, so the second most disappointing film of summer 2017 was Alien Covenant. Now, my expectations for this were already pretty average, middle of the road, because it's a sequel to Prometheus, which I think is a 5 out of 10 average, mediocre film that just got completely bogged down in its chronology, and just Damon Lindelof just completely screwing over every aspect of the script, I guess. And also Ridley Scott, I think, is in the process of George Lucasing his own legacy in terms of the Alien franchise. But then when the posters and the trailers came out for Alien Covenant, I thought, oh great, this is going to be a return to the Alien or Aliens approach in the horror, maybe the action as well, just some solid, great aliening stuff, and maybe a couple of callbacks to Prometheus because Noomi Rapace and Michael Fassbender are in the cast, but, maybe you can get the best of both worlds here. What we got was Prometheus Part 2, and the last 10-15 minutes was Alien, but shit. Now, let's just break down some of the bullet points here. The plot holes are numerous and basically just constant throughout the entire film. I think Michael Fassbender is the best actor given the best performance here, but the rest of them just seem that they've been saddled with some pretty lame characters. I think Danny McBride could have made the best of the material that he could. I think Catherine Waterston is just playing ghetto diet Ridley. I think that Ripley. Sorry, I think that she was just saddled with just a really lame character. I think the CGI alien was absolutely pants, and it really, really confuses me because my fiance is subscribed to Makeup Artist magazine, and they did a whole Alien Covenant feature where they showed all of these practical effects and these practical alien suits that they wore and that they used on set. And there's even interviews with Catherine Waterston and Danny McBride saying that a real-life alien suit was chasing them through the corridors of the Covenant spaceship. But none of that is in the film. None of that's in the film because it's a terrible-looking CGI alien that would barely pass in a 2004 PlayStation 2 cutscene. It looks terrible. There's the scene where you do get the very first chest burster coming out of Billy Crudup's chest, and it looks terrible. It looks legitimately awful. The special effects are really, in terms of the alien, the space stuff and the Covenant, it's that the special effects on that are fine, but the alien looks shockingly poor. In almost every shot that it's in, it looks really, really bad. I think that it's not remotely scary. The cinematography, in order to try and communicate horror and scares, is poorly done. I think Ridley Scott, in terms of this universe, has completely lost touch with what made the original Alien so effective as in terms of a claustrophobic horror film. And like I said, he seems to be George Lucasing his own legacy. And I think I got really disappointed because I was really looking forward to a return to that Alien vibe, or Aliens vibe. And I even saw Alien Covenant with a friend who really liked Prometheus. He saw stuff in Prometheus that I personally did not see, and he really appreciated it and enjoyed it. And we went to see the film together, and we both left it very, very disappointed and let down. He did not like Alien Covenant. He had the exact same outcome that I did in terms of his opinion, and he liked Prometheus. I think that if you want an Alien film, you're going to leave disappointed because it's just so poorly done in terms of the cinematography, the direction, the cast, the special effects. And if you want something that's more of a sequel to Prometheus that expands this universe, you're met with loads of contradictions and mythology that's not remotely interesting and actually sort of devalues the alien stuff, and it's just full of stupid characters doing stupid things and loads of questions that is still unresolved, because that might actually be interesting, God forbid. And I think that Ridley Scott is the kind of guy who needs to leave his own universe alone now. One reason I was excited for Alien Covenant was because Ridley Scott's last film was The Martian, which was one of my favourite films of the year it came out. And I thought The Martian was an absolutely terrific film. And I thought maybe Ridley Scott's got a new lease on life here, but no, Alien Covenant was pretty lame, and thankfully the audience did not really turn out for it. I think it managed to break even or make a small profit, but not nearly enough to continue on with this approach. I know Ridley Scott was saying, we're going to make a new trilogy of Prometheus Alien Covenant films, and it looks like that is now not going to happen. That is now on the back burner. So... I think Alien Covenant was a massive step down. I actually think it's an even lesser film than Prometheus, and I did not rate Prometheus particularly highly to begin with. And also, it possibly has one of the funniest lines of summer 2017. I'll do the fingering. That's just terrible. But my most disappointing film of summer 2017, and I think I'm disappointed in it for what is a very subjective, personal reason. I'll get into that in a minute, but that is The Mummy. Now, my expectations were not particularly high for The Mummy, because it's directed by Alex Kurtzman, who has not directed a film in his life, and the films that he has written or produced, such as the Transformers films, Cowboys and Aliens, Star Trek and Star Trek Into Darkness, and Ender's Game, are films that they're just not good. I think even though he's somehow managed to make a successful Hollywood career, he's done it off the back of terrible movies. So that did not help with my anticipation for The Mummy. But I think what kind of really disappointed me was that I love the Universal Monsters films. I've got a Blu-ray box set with the original films from The Mummy, Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, The Wolfman, Creature from the Black Lagoon, Dracula. I love those films. I think they're terrific. I even watched the black and white Mummy film a few days before I saw this new Dark Universe Mummy film, and that film still holds up. The first 10 minutes are genuinely creepy and unnerving. And I love the idea that Universal, who basically pioneered the idea of a cinematic universe in the 1920s and the 1930s, are bringing it back, and I think that's a great idea. But what really disappointed me about The Mummy is that my fiancée is a massive fan of those films as well, and she really, really, really wanted to like this and really wanted to see a dark universe be successful, and seeing her very disappointed did not make me very happy, if that makes sense. She's not really into the DC Marvel films all that much, or at least in terms of the shared continuity and all the news stories that surround them and all the pre-release hype and everything. But she was for The Mummy. And the fact that the film just turned out the way it did is hugely disappointing to both of us. I think that there is one funny line, Jenny, run! But they seem to completely bungle this. I think that Tom Cruise is really poorly miscast here. I think Russell Crowe's interpretation of Jekyll and Hyde is really, it's such a hodgepodge of the elements of the character that they don't really know what they're doing with it. Sofia Boutella is a great presence on screen, but the film ends in a way that kind of ensures that she is not coming back to this franchise, which is a massive disappointment. I think I keep on saying I think a lot, but it's true. These are my thoughts, these are my opinions. If you were going to be doing a Dark Universe film, The Mummy feels like it would be an Avengers-style Endgame, and The Mummy would be the Loki. The Mummy is a big, powerful threat that you could bring together Frankenstein, Dracula, Creature from the Black Lagoon, and others to fight. Whereas when you open with that, where do you go from there? What is the end game here? There doesn't really seem to be an end game in sight for the Dark Universe. Whereas with Marvel, you had the Avengers. With DC, you have Justice League. What do you have with the Dark Universe? What is the end game? It feels very muddled going out of the gate and making announcements that Javier Bardem is Frankenstein's monster, Johnny Depp is the Invisible Man, Angelina Jolie is possibly the Bride of Frankenstein. You make these announcements, but what is the end game here? What are we getting excited for? The potential cliffhanger? I don't know, because I don't know what the ending of the film is. I don't know where it's going. I don't know what is remotely happening here. They went full steam ahead in terms of setting up this universe or setting the pieces in place, but The Mummy itself was just a really terrible starting point, and I just don't know what's going to happen here, because when you get Alien Covenant, that's basically, yeah, whatever, this is a universe I don't really care about because Prometheus stopped me from caring about it, and whatever, let's just stop this thing. But for The Mummy, it's got a legacy behind it. It has this pedigree of incredible source material behind it, and some very talented people involved in it creatively, and also Alex Kurtzman. I'm just wondering what like, they've seem to have bungled this whole thing up, and do you start again from scratch? Do you start again in 10 or 15 years? The everything is up in the air at the moment, and that is massively disappointing for a universe that I really, really wanted to get invested in and really, really wanted to connect with, and The Mummy just did not deliver on almost any front. It wasn't, the action was lame, the scares were pretty lame as well. The money, the $125 to $150 million budget was not up on screen. And then the only good thing you have involved in Sofia Boutella, you sort of get rid of by the end of the film. Massively disappointed, and that is why The Mummy is my most disappointing film of summer 2017. What were your most disappointing films of the summer? Is there anything that you've got at the tail end of summer that you are looking forward to? Let me know in the comment section below. I would really love to hear what you guys thought of my list, and also post your own list below. I'd massively appreciate it, because I do love the communication with all of you guys and chatting with you in the Facebook or Twitter and YouTube, and also on my Patreon, where I also take questions. And speaking of which, I'm going to be going onto my Patreon and taking some questions from my faithful, awesome patrons. And if you'd like to become a patron of the Film Brits podcast, you can go on www.patreon.com/Trilby, and you can pledge to get an early download. You can become a sponsor. You can get your questions read out, and we can talk about certain topics on the Film Brits podcast. Be sure to go on that, because that is what keeps the lights on here, and I'd massively appreciate it. So the first question comes from Winter, who says, "So I saw Spider-Man Homecoming. I thought it was great, especially their take on the Vulture. A disenfranchised working class man trying to provide for his family and comrades is an interesting place to take a character that has previously just been an odd scientist. I would love for this to be I would love this to be similar to Batman the Animated Series as Mr. Freeze, and set the Vulture's go-to origin story in future iterations of Spidey. This week, I'd love to hear your ideas for a revitalization of a classic supervillain." I think that's what you see often once a successful comic book movie has come out, is that the comic books start to reflect what the audience has responded to in that film. So it would not surprise me if in the next reboot of the Marvel Comics universe, or the next iteration of Vulture, would be something akin to Michael Keaton's working class normal guy who turns to crime for his family. I think that is something that Marvel Comics it might behoove them to take that approach but there is also something to be said about the dynamic of the really old, crusty, weird dude in the Vulture costume, who is like nearly 100 years old, going up against a young Spider-Man. I think there's something to be said for both approaches, but we've had 60 to 70 years, I say 60 to 70 years, more like 50 years of the Vulture. So maybe a change like Michael Keaton's approach is something that the comic books could stand to benefit from. That might be a fun way to go, and also get maybe fans of the Vulture's interpretation in Spider-Man Homecoming to read some of the comic books. I think what can help comic book sales helps to benefit the industry overall. So in terms of ideas for revitalizations of a classic superhero, I'm probably the wrong person to ask. I don't really have any strong opinions in terms of what I'd like to change in the supervillains or the supervillain department. I think that some of these characters have been long-lasting for a very good reason. I think characters like the Condiment King are one and done, and ones that probably would not benefit from a revitalization or a reboot. But I think that if you're going to be doing stuff like these Lego Batman films or Lego Batman universe, I think that anything Lego inspired might be really, really interesting and fun. I think Warner Brothers' approach to the DC and Warner Brothers villains in the Lego Batman film was really inspired and really fun, and I think that was really, really engaging, and a great use of the license as well, whether it was the Gremlins or Sauron or Voldemort and all these characters in the Lego Batman film. Really fun, really engaging, great Easter eggs, and just a lot of fun overall. Let's talk more about the Marvel supervillains, though. I think I need to stop saying I think. I pontificate. The X-Men films need to go a lot weirder with their villains. That's what I'd like to see revitalized. I think villains like Krakoa, who was the living island that the X-Men had to fight in the 80s. I think it was the 80s. I think it was during the revitalization or the reboot of the X-Men franchise and the comics in the 80s. Krakoa was the first villain that they fought, I believe. The Krakoa is the living island who lured people over there and tried to eat them and gain their power. That's something that the X-Men film franchise from Fox needs to embrace more. The weird and the offshoots and the really weird aspects of the universe, because that's where a lot of the fun can be found. Basically, anything really weird and fun and out there in terms of the X-Men franchise and the mutants, that is something I would love to see the 20th Century Fox do a lot more of in their film franchise. With Deadpool, you know that you can enjoy the weird and the out there concepts, and hopefully when they go and do this Dark Phoenix or Supernova film or whatever they're going to be calling it in the end, they do embrace the weird and maybe some of the camp and some of the just visually inventive ideas that came from the comic books. That's what I'd like to see in terms of comic book villains being revitalized. Not necessarily a specific one, just that whole legacy. Same for the Fantastic Four. If they are going to be doing a reboot of that franchise, whether it goes back to Marvel or 20th Century Fox, just embrace some of the weird aspects. Yeah, you can try and make Doctor Doom a quote-unquote realistic-looking character, but it kind of defies the point of it. You've got to go for the weird. You've got to make things maybe look a little bit campy, but it's how you approach it that makes them work in the end. So that's what I'd like to see 20th Century Fox go a bit more out there and campy. The next question comes from Edward Sweet, who says, with the fairly recent announcement of a Judge Dredd TV series entitled Judge Dredd Mega City 1, what are your hopes for the series, and which other books or movies would you like to see brought into the limelight through a TV series? Hard mode. No Truman Show. Okay, so yeah, Judge Dredd TV series. I think a lot of the creative aspects of that series are still up in the air. I think that whether or not that gets made or who's going to be in it, I think we're kind of lacking on announcements for that. I'm going to quickly double check that. I think people have been saying that Carl Urban might be joining it, but I don't think there's been any official announcements for it. There has recently been some concept art released for it, and I think we're going to be it's going to be happening 2018-ish. So I need to hear more from the creative team and the cast involved before I get my hopes up for it. But I do hope that they do take the aesthetic of the Dredd film. That's probably the best way to keep the budget down, relatively speaking, and maybe doing a procedural cop type of show in the vein of Law and Order, but much more violent and much more brutal and much more entertaining. That might be the best approach for Judge Dredd Mega City 1. I'm not entirely familiar with the comic book series, which is kind of sacrilege because I'm British and Judge Dredd is a British comic book character, so sacrilege on my part, I'm afraid. It is really through the films and through hearsay that I know much about Judge Dredd. I know there's also Judge Death and the Outlands, or is it the Wastelands, or whatever it's called. I'm not sure how far, whether or not a TV series will be able to approach those subjects, but hopefully they do carry on the Dredd movie, because that has got a lot of goodwill behind it. But that is also a double-edged sword. Not many people saw the Dredd film, so if you say this new Dredd TV series is going to be a sequel to that film hardly anyone saw, then people who did not see the film might not even tune in. That might be a double-edged sword, but it'll be interesting to know what type of approach they take for it. So which other books or movies would I like to see brought back into the limelight through a TV series? I think, once again, X-Men might be a fun TV series, like a proper live-action one, something... maybe like a live-action version of X-Men. What's it called? What's the TV series called? I'm blanking here. X-Men TV series. What was it? There's The Gift is coming out soon, but I don't know how much that counts. Come on, why can't I find it? I definitely did not dream it as X-Men the animated series, but that wasn't it. This is X-Men Evolution. That's it. Maybe a live-action version of something like that would be fun. The Terminator series, the Sarah Connor Chronicles, was really, really good. So doing something like that might be the best way to go, instead of just another feature-length film, which James Cameron has threatened to do. I don't really have that much investment in TV, to be honest. I just find it really hard to find the time to sit down and watch episode after episode after episode. That's kind of one reason I do prefer talking about movies, because it's a one and done commitment thing. But what other books or movies would you like to see brought back into the limelight through a TV series? Like, I'm just thinking back to some of my favourite books. Like Misery is one of my favourite books, but that works so well as a standalone film because the tension just ratchets up throughout one sitting, throughout one period, as opposed to going back week in, week out, where you lose that tension every week. Unless you Netflix it and you marathon it, but not everyone is going to be marathoning it. So I might have to pass on that. But I will say I would like to see Terminator and X-Men make a return to TV. That would be an approach I'd really like to see them take. And finally, Dean Jones asks, I asked this on the Movie Mania podcast a while ago, but are there any other properties you'd like to see get the Lego Movie treatment? I think the main one that I'd love to see get a Lego Movie treatment... Okay, let's talk realistically here. So let's go for Warner Brothers properties, because that's... Warner Brothers Animation is the company that does the Lego movies. It's the reason they did Lego Batman, because the Batman and DC universe are owned by Warner Brothers. So let's, just for the sake of sanity, let's just limit the films that they could make out of Lego to DC properties. So just looking at DC films franchises, we've got Mad Max, which would be just the most fun thing ever. Like, just imagine the inventive vehicles you could do with that, the inventive environments and the deserts and the desertscapes that you could make out of Lego. I think that would be really fun. You've got the Harry Potter franchise as well. I think you could do maybe not a single Harry Potter film, but maybe a Harry Potter sequence in a larger Lego movie. I think visiting that universe would be really fun. And you could poke fun at some of the sillier aspects of the franchise as well in Lego format. The Harry Potter Lego games have been pretty successful, so there is a precedent there for Lego making fun of that material. What else do we have? We have the we have The Conjuring. The Conjuring is a Warner Brothers franchise. Yeah, let's do the Lego Conjuring. That's my answer. The Lego Conjuring, and instead of let's say Annabelle, you've got this really... Let's say it's a Lego rubber duck, because that's one of the recurring jokes in Lego games where they've just got a rubber duck everywhere. So yeah, instead of Annabelle, it's a rubber duck, and The Conjuring is the franchise that I'd like to see Lego-fied, because you could just have so much fun. And other horror franchises that Warner Brothers owns, they own the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. So Nightmare on Elm Street... Lego Nightmare on Elm Street meets Lego Conjuring meets Lego Scooby-Doo meets Lego Lethal Weapon. Yeah, that sounds like fun. But, okay, I'm going to go for Mad Max, Harry Potter, and The Conjuring, because why the hell not? That sounds like so much fun. So what I'll do now is that I'll go to the lightning round, where I basically put out a call on Twitter saying I'm going to be doing a bunch of questions, and I have to answer them in 60 seconds or less. I have not looked at any of these questions. Blimey, I have a lot of notifications on Twitter. So let me just get my clock going. Let me just scroll down. Okay, Dean Jones's question about the Lego Movie treatment is there. I've already answered that one. So, scroll up. Okay, right. Start the lightning round. 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, the first question comes from Matt12, who says, have you seen Buffy the Vampire Slayer? If so, what's your favourite episode and who's your favourite character? I have seen the first 3 or 4 episodes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. My fiancée was a massive fan of it. She had the first 3 or 4 seasons on VHS, and I've seen the first 3 or 4 episodes on the VHS that she has. I've just not watched any more of it. It is a series that I've been wanting to watch. I like Joss Whedon's work. I really liked Firefly and Serenity, so it is a series that I've been meaning to watch. I think it is something I would really, really enjoy, and I did really, really enjoy the first 3 or 4 episodes. I thought they were really fun and really engaging, but that's really all I can talk about in terms of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I apologise. Okay, next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Graham J. Williamson says, who is the better character at their best, Captain Jack or River Song? It's got to be Captain Jack. River Song really only had real one or two high notes or high moments as the character. That was in her introduction, whereas Captain Jack has some, even in some of his lesser appearances, has always had some sort of base appeal. When you have a story like the 3-parter Utopia, The Sound of Drums, and why am I blanking? But that 3-parter, he was useful in Utopia and at the beginning of The Sound of Drums, but then once he got kidnapped, he was basically a nothing presence for the very final episode. At the Last of the Time Lords, that was the episode. He was basically just locked in chains, which was a wonderful fantasy, but basically did nothing for the overall story. But still, Captain Jack and John Barrowman, he just oozes charisma. River Song, with the exception of her very first appearances, just oozed annoyance and obnoxiousness. Okay, so good question, Graham. Okay, next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Manta Blu-ray says, with Flash having both a TV and film version, which character/property would you like to have TV and film versions of concurrently? Honestly, I don't... There's nothing I really want that does that. It's, I don't know, because I find it hard enough to just keep up with one TV series, let alone a film and TV series, and it might just confuse me, and I don't know, it's not something I've really thought about, to be honest. I'm not really going to be watching the Flash TV series, I have no inclination to do it, so really the movie version is all I will have when I watch Justice League. So, what character/property would you like to have TV and film versions of concurrently? It's not an idea that really appeals to me. Mainly because of my terrible mental organisation skills. So, yeah, nothing for me, unfortunately. Sorry. Okay, so next question. 3, 2, 1, go. Couch Potato asks, where does Series 10 of Doctor Who rank amongst the other seasons of Doctor Who, in your opinion? Season 10 probably ranks right in the middle, and that's not me saying that Series 10 is a bad series, it's just that I think that the series has had much better days, whether it's Series 1, 3, 4, or 5, or 6 Part 1. So Series 10 probably ranks around 5th, or maybe 4th. It's definitely between 4th and 5th. If I gave this question proper long time thought, like I said, I don't pre-read these questions or pre-script them, so it probably would be somewhere around the middle. It would be below Series 1, Series 3, Series 4, and Series 5. So, let's call it 5th or 4th place off the top of my head. Okay, so next question. Let me just scroll up. There's a bloody fly in the room. Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1, go. Connor Dockra asks, what do you think about the Death of Stalin trailer? Yeah, this is an interesting trailer. It's basically a movie, a black comedy from the creators of In the Loop and The Thick of It. It tells the story of what happened in the days after the death of Joseph Stalin in Soviet Russia. And it looks really, really funny and just as black a comedy as you can get. There has been, if you go in the comment section or in the YouTube videos for the trailer, it does have about a third of dislikes. However, it seems like the main objection seems to be coming from Russian viewers who are speaking in Russian in the comment section, so I have no idea what their issues with the film are. I also, it's not a period of history that I'm incredibly familiar with, so I don't really have that sort of context for it either. But the trailer itself looked really fun, it looked really offbeat, it looked right up my alley, and it's coming from a creative team that I really trust, and it has a really solid cast in it as well. Jason Isaacs' scene where he's messing around with that guy really, really made me laugh. Okay, so next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Claire Carey asks, what direction should a Hunchback of Notre Dame remake go down in your opinion? Musical, cast, tone, and you keep the gargoyles. I'm assuming you're referring to the Disney film when you talk about the gargoyles and the musical and such. A Hunchback of Notre Dame live-action remake, let's say, you go for the darker elements of the source material, I think. If kids or their parents want their kids to watch a lighter, fluffier version of that story, you have the animated film. Give them an alternative. Disney have had about 20 years to reflect and look back on that film's legacy, what fans like, what they did not like, and they should use that feedback effectively. They should get rid of the gargoyles, or maybe allude to them and go for the nostalgia critic. Was it the nostalgia critic who came up with the idea that maybe they should be in his mind, and that would be a really great and effective way to get your comic relief in there. But you keep Hellfire, you keep a lot of the songs, you go for the darker tone, in my opinion. At least that's what I would do. You'd definitely get a more critically acclaimed film in that regard, and maybe an Oscar contender. And Claire Carey says that Claire Carey's got another question, but I'll just give a quick answer to it. 3, 2, 1, go. You've said you've been watching RuPaul's Drag Race. What's your favourite season, and who is your favourite queen so far? When I say I've been watching RuPaul's Drag Race, it's a lot more passive than I probably let on. My partner watches it a lot, and I tend to watch it on in the background, and sometimes I do give it my full attention. However, I can't really differentiate between the seasons, and I can't really remember any of the queens by name. That's because me generally giving not really giving it my full attention, I can't name any of the queens off the top of my head, apart from Ivy Winters, because that's how they say her name, and that's kind of what made it stick out. Sorry for the disappointing answer, but that's just where my head is at when I've been watching that series. It's fun, I don't give it much more of my time outside of watching it. Okay, 3, 2, 1, go. Joe Warren asks, have you seen any of either Russell T Davies or Steve Moffat's work before Doctor Who? Steve Moffat's work before 2005, I've watched Steve Moffat's Curse of the Fatal Death, and I don't really think I've watched much more besides that. I've watched Jekyll, I've watched Sherlock as well. As for Rusty Davies, I watched Casanova, which was a lot of fun, and since then I've watched Cucumber Banana, and what's the third one of that trilogy? I can't remember. Joe Warren in the next tweet does clarify by this I mean before they became showrunner. The only real one that sticks out would be Curse of the Fatal Death from Steve Moffat and Casanova from Rusty T Davies. It was Casanova that Rusty T Davies worked with David Tennant on, and that's why he cast him as the 10th Doctor. But I do really recommend you check out Casanova. Apart from that, off the top of my head, I've not really watched anything from before they became a showrunner, and it's something I probably do need to fill in that gap for. Okay, next question. A good question, though. Next question, 3, 2, 1, go. William Jack asks, what do you think is Rusty Davies' worst moment of Doctor Who, and what do you think is Moffat's? Rusty Davies' worst moment. I'm not gonna go in depth and talk about his worst aspect as a writer or creator, but I'll go for the worst moment. It probably was, God, off the top of my head, his worst moment was likely, I think it was Love and Monsters. I think that was definitely the lowest point of his tenure. I believe Rusty Davies did right. That was his lowest moment. That whole episode is his lowest moment. And I think the lowest of the lowest moment in there is when it's revealed that Moaning Myrtle has become a pavement, and that they do have a love life together, which means that Elton literally spends his nights pounding the pavement. And as for Moffat's worst moment, it was probably the end of the Wedding of River Song, when the Doctor comes out of the doorway and says, "Actually thinking about it." I've just gone over my minutes, but I think Rusty Davies' worst moment is an entire episode, and it's hard to kind of pin down maybe the worst moment in that. But for Moffat's entire approach to the programme, it can be diluted down to that singular line, actually thinking about it. Everything wrong about Stephen Moffat's approach to storytelling and the Doctor and the writing can be boiled down to that single line. Next question. Oh no, I've accidentally locked my phone. Because I used my phone to do the timer. 3, 2, 1, go. Jude Holmes 42 asks, what did you think of The Doctor Falls? I liked it. I liked it a lot. I think it was... I need to stop saying I think. It was one of Moffat's better finales, certainly the best one since The Big Bang and the Pandorica opens. The world enough in time was a superb setup, and I don't think The Doctor Falls quite lives up to that setup, but it still manages to stay standing. There's some really effective moments. Peter Capaldi's speech to Missy and the Master, pleading with them for help, is one of his defining and best moments, particularly as an actor as well. Capaldi just nails that scene. It's terrific. There's some scary elements to it. I think the Cybermen were rather cleverly used for the most part, and there was also just some really fun science in there with the black hole, and they're playing around with time dilation and the length of time. That was really creative, and I think it's the stuff that great sci-fi is made out of. Still some weak moments and such, and I think the very end needs a lot of justifying in the Christmas special, but still, we'll cross the bridge when we come to it. And let me just take a swig of drink. Right, the very final question. 3, 2, 1, go. The Slinky Man asks, top 10 worst movies you've ever seen. Blimey, this is meant to be a lightning round, 60 seconds. Off the top of my head, worst movies I've ever seen: 50 Shades of Grey, Amazing Spider-Man 2, The Room, Twilight Saga Breaking Dawn Part 2, Top Cat the Movie, Project X. How many have I named? In terms of, I'm just mainly narrowing it down to films I've watched since I've been a critic, or I've taken up criticism as a hobby, so maybe The Room does not count. What else have we got? Yeah, I think those ones are justifiable to put at the very, very bottom of the list. I'm not going to do a whole top 10 or give in-depth reasons or whatever, because this is the lightning round and I'm kind of out of time. So thank you very much, folks, for listening to the latest episode of the Film Brits podcast. I massively appreciate your support via Patreon and in the comment section, and listening on SoundCloud and iTunes and on YouTube. Please let me know what you thought of the podcast in the comment section below. Be sure to subscribe to me on Trilby Reviews. Be sure to be sure to follow me on Twitter at Trilby Reviews, where you can keep an eye out for my Film Brits related posts and my lightning round questions. And please, once again, please be sure to subscribe to me on Patreon and be sure to pledge for the varying rewards. My name has been Trilby. This is Film Brits, and I shall see you folks next time.